Hey, hopefully I can keep this video short and sweet. I've had to re-record this 1,000 times. But, today, the day I'm filming this, is Monday, October 13th, 2025, otherwise known as Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, I am on stolen land. I am not indigenous to the United States. I'm not indigenous to Canada. I'm not indigenous to occupied Turtle Island, otherwise known as North America. I am not from any of the Indigenous Nations whose land that I am on. I'm not. And today, I am going to be asking a few things of my viewers, mostly to listen to and sit with the perspectives of Indigenous peoples, to really confront yourself with the ugly and horrific history of settler colonialism and the impacts it is continuing to have on Indigenous communities, the impacts that white supremacy is having on Indigenous communities. And I'm going to ask you to listen to their perspectives and to amplify their perspectives, especially if you have white privilege. I'm going to ask you to use your privilege more responsibly and to amplify Indigenous voices and to believe them, to educate yourself. I will have several links in the description that I'm going to ask my viewers to look at, that I believe are super important for educating oneself about the continued impacts of settler colonialism on Indigenous peoples here, and also some of the injustices that have happened historically and continue to happen. I'll have links to the NDN Landback movement page. I need my viewers to educate themselves on the Landback movement. I really, really do. And to learn what that means, and to demand justice for Indigenous communities, and yes, for land back. I'm going to ask you to consider that. Also, I'll have links to several things regarding the communities in Western Alaska. For those who do not know, in Western Alaska, many communities, especially Indigenous communities, are being devastated from the impacts of several recent severe storms, including Typhoon Halong. I'm going to have a link to Show Me Your Mask, or Birdie's post on Threads. It's a video post that really is very educational about the impacts of settler colonialism and forced displacement on Indigenous Alaskan communities, and how a lot of them were forcibly displaced into these flood-prone areas that are currently being devastated by the impacts of the climate crisis, among other injustices, including, yes, Typhoon Halong. And I will also have a link to an organization that provides relief funds for the communities of Western Alaska. I'm going to have links to all of that in the description, both the Threads post and the relief organization. And something else that I want to touch on, I guess, just briefly, especially for those who are in the US or who have engaged with white sage before. Because white sage is a closed practice, a closed Indigenous practice, particularly the white sage that is, the use of the white sage that is Indigenous to North America, or US specifically. I'm really going to ask you guys to listen to Indigenous people when they say, hey, their usage of this particular herb, usage of smudging is close to our particular Indigenous practices. Please listen to them and respect their wishes for people who are outside of their nations, of their traditions, of their culture, to respectfully just not engage with that, to not buy or support these companies that are poaching and damaging the ecosystem. They're poaching the white sage illegally, they're harming Indigenous communities, they're exploiting Indigenous practices culturally and profiting off of them, and the Indigenous communities are not seeing a cent from that. Something I want us to consider here in the US especially, and in general, is that it hasn't always been legal for Indigenous people to even engage with their cultural practices or religious practices. It hasn't. Indigenous people's cultural and religious practices were only legalized here within the United States on August 11th, 1978, with the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. Yeah, that's right. It's only been about 47 years, give or take. Indigenous practices, culturally and religiously speaking, have not been legal for Indigenous people themselves to engage with for even half a century. Yeah, they were completely prohibited. You really need to be more respectful if you're not from these Indigenous cultures or practices and you are engaging with something that is not yours. That's the best I can say about that. Just please respect, Indigenous people and the perspectives and what they have gone through. Because they're not just saying it's go, this is ours, you can't have any. No, there is real injustice that they have gone through. They have not been able to legally engage with their own cultural religious practices for even 50 years, for even half a century. Please be more respectful. Please listen to and believe them when they say, hey, we'd rather you not engage with that particular herb. It is sacred to our culture. It is sacred to our tradition. Please don't smudge. This is not a part of your tradition or culture. I need us, especially those of us who are racialized this way, to be more respectful and to actually not appropriate or exploit Indigenous practices, especially if nothing you are doing is actually helping or benefiting Indigenous people or their communities. I'm really gonna need us to be better about that. That is the nicest thing I can say about that. That it's not right. It's not right. And I'm also going to ask, especially those of us who are not Indigenous to Turtle Island or the US and are on Turtle Island or the US or Canada, I highly suggest you look into your own ancestral cultural practices. The use of smoke cleansing is not limited to Indigenous practices to North America. There are smoke cleansing practices and herbs and traditions throughout most cultures in most parts of the world. And I am going to encourage you to find out what that is for you. Maybe there's a particular herb, maybe rosemary, maybe garden sage. I'm going to ask you to look into what those are and to perhaps consider using that instead. Look into your own cultural medicines and practices and methods of cleansing. And really be more respectful towards your fellow human in general. Be more respectful towards Indigenous peoples when they say, hey, we don't want you appropriating our culture. We're trying to preserve our culture. It's been really harmed by the impacts of colonization, white supremacy, capitalism. We would like to keep our cultures intact and allow it to survive, which I think is valid, and we should be respecting that, and be more respectful about that, and do better to be more respectful about that. We also need to do better about, actually uplifting Indigenous voices and perspectives, Indigenous-run businesses and movements, and to really do better by our fellow human in general. And again, I will have links to all these things, and, fuck Christopher Columbus, fuck colonialism, and fuck white supremacy, and Landback now. I'm going to have the links that I told you all about in the description. Please sit with the words I said. All right? Bye.